Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 9, Text 19. Translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhakti-Vedanta Swami Prabhupada. Balasya neha sharanam pitaro nrsimha nartasya chagadam udandati majjato no taptasya tat pratividhir ya ihanja sheshtas tavad vibho tanubhritam tvad upekshitanam. Translation. My Lord Nrsimhadev, this is Prahlad, pacifying the Lord with prayers. My dear Lord Nrsimhadev, O Supreme, because of a bodily conception of life, embodied souls neglected and not cared for by you, cannot do anything for their betterment. Whatever remedies they accept, although perhaps temporarily beneficial, are certainly impermanent. For example, a father and mother cannot protect their child. A physician and medicine cannot relieve a suffering patient. And a boat on the ocean cannot protect a drowning man. Purport. Through parental care, through remedies for different kinds of disease, and through means of protection on the water, in the air, and on land, there is always an endeavor for relief from various kinds of suffering in the material world, but none of them are guaranteed measures for protection. They may be beneficial temporarily, but they afford no permanent benefit. Despite the presence of a father and mother, a child cannot be protected from accidental death, disease, and various other miseries. No one can help, including the parents. Ultimately, the shelter is the Lord, and one who takes shelter of the Lord is protected. This is guaranteed, as the Lord says in Bhagavad-gita. Kaunteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. O son of Kunti, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. Therefore, unless one is protected by the mercy of the Lord, no remedial measure can act effectively. One should consequently depend fully on the causeless mercy of the Lord, although as a matter of routine duty one must, of course, accept other remedial measures. No one can protect one who is neglected by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this material world, everyone is trying to counteract the onslaught of material nature, but everyone is ultimately fully controlled by material nature. Therefore, even though so-called philosophers and scientists try to surmount the onslaught of material nature, they have not been able to do so. Krishna says in Bhagavad-gita that the real sufferings of the material world are four: Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadhi. Birth, death, old age, and disease. In the history of the world, no one has been successful in conquering these miseries imposed by material nature. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha. Nature, Prakriti, is so strong that no one can overcome her stringent laws. So-called scientists, philosophers, religionists, and politicians should therefore conclude that they cannot offer facilities to the people in general. They should make vigorous propaganda to awaken the populace and raise them to the platform of Krishna consciousness. Our humble attempt to propagate the Krishna consciousness movement all over the world is the only remedy that can bring about a peaceful and happy life. We can never be happy without the mercy of the Supreme Lord. Tvad upekshitanam. If we keep displeasing our Supreme Father, we shall never be happy within this material world in either the upper or lower planetary systems. Prahlad Maharaj is here pointing out to Nrsimhadev what he already knows. He already knows everything. An important fact which No one knows. And no one will ever teach us in the schools, colleges or universities that there's no protection in this world, there's no security. No one can help us. Only Krishna can help us. Srila Prabhupada quite often quoted this verse. We can see its application again and again and again. No medicine can protect a person who's destined to die. Fly a person by helicopter to Apollo Hospital, give him all the best medicines, but if he's destined to die, he will die. If someone's destined to live, then the person who's abandoned as a hopeless case by the doctors, he'll live. That doesn't mean, as Srila Prabhupada points out here, that one shouldn't accept remedial measures. They're also given by Krishna. But we should know that ultimately everything is in the hands of the Supreme Lord. An example of this, there are many examples, but an example given in the next canto, the 8th canto of Bhagavatam, is of Gajendra, the king of the elephants. Now, in his previous life, he was Indradyumna, a devotee who was meditating, who circumstantially became cursed by Agastya, because Indradyumna was deep in meditation when Agastya came to Indradyumna's ashram. Indradyumna didn't notice him, so Indradyumna did not stand up to welcome Agastya, and Agastya cursed him that you're so dull, you should become a dull-headed elephant, an ignorant animal. So, was Indradyumna protected by Krishna? Yes, he was protected. But Krishna's protection might not always take the form that we think it should do. Krishna will protect us, but we can't give a directive to Krishna, you have to protect me in this way. Exactly how he protects us, that's up to him. There's an anecdote which Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur recounted, which I translated and included in that Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava, of a man who was a great devotee, so it seemed, of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, whose only daughter, of course nowadays everyone has only daughters, or it's most common to have only one daughter, but previously people would have many children. One a year, Prabhupada said, in relation to Vasudeva and Devaki. That's a little fast. So, his only daughter, his much beloved daughter, she became very sick, and the devotion of this devotee of Gauranga increased. He would daily go to visit his guru and do special pujas and all the time call out the name Gaura, 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 praying to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to help my darling daughter, who nevertheless, in front of the eyes of R. Babu, I believe his name was, R, of course, is an abbreviation for some other name which we don't know. So, in front of the eyes of R. Babu, his daughter died after a period of prolonged, agonizing pain, at which point R. Babu became an atheist. Or at least he didn't accept that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I prayed to him, I'm his devotee, and still he made my daughter suffer so much. So that means he's not really there at all. So Indradyumna was cursed. You may say, hey, what's going on here? I'm just meditating on the Supreme Lord. I wasn't doing anything wrong. For no fault of my own, I was cursed. But he didn't take it like that. He was cursed to become an elephant. He didn't just become any elephant. There's so many elephants. but he became the king of the elephants, known as Gajendra, which means the king of the elephants. And in the heavenly planets, or heavenly area, at the base of Trikut mountain, Trikut means 3 peaks. In the jungle, he was living with his family of elephants, many Gajendranis, I guess, when many wives. Of course, they didn't have a legal marriage, but animals don't need that. So with his female elephants, Hastini, the word comes in Bhagavad-gita, Hastini. And he was not only the king of the elephants, he was the king of the jungle. Generally, the lion is called the king of the animals, king of the jungle, but in this case he was so powerful that even the lions were afraid of him. And he was a noble-souled elephant. He gave protection to all the animals, and they felt secure under him. And of course his wives and children, they felt very secure and protected by him. Remember the verse we read? No one, Balasya neha sharanang pitaro nrsimha. No one can be protected. The child cannot be protected by the father. But he had this mood that I'm big and strong and good, and I use my strength to protect others. So, one time he went to a lake at the base of the Trikut mountain and laboriously sprayed all his wives and children and washed them all, and in this way he was very affectionately caring for them. He was a good, dutiful father. And then disaster struck in the form of a crocodile. Normally, a crocodile is not as powerful as an elephant, but in the water, the crocodile is it's more accustomed to that atmosphere, whereas the elephant is not. So, it's a long story of how the queens were watching him and children were watching him, and it was as if their world was coming undone. Normally no one would attack him anyway. They wouldn't even dare to attack him. But all of a sudden they were faced with the prospect of our husband, our Lord, our Master, the one on whom our world revolves. Prabhu, yeah, the word is there, Prabhu. He's in danger, and there's nothing we can do to help him. And there's nothing he can do to help himself, it seems also. So, Gajendra, he was a great devotee from the previous life, and by the mercy of the Supreme Lord, at that moment he was inspired from within the heart to remember prayers to the Supreme Lord, which he had memorized in his previous life, which he then started chanting. And Lord Vishnu came from Vaikuntha on the back of Garuda and severed the head of the crocodile with his Sudarshan chakra. And that place is, at least a facsimile of that place is in South Tamil Nadu, which is at Tirunelveli district. That's Gajendra Moksha Sthana. Although the original place is in the heavenly planets, but like Ahobilam, it's considered non-different from the place of that pastime. The point here is that no one can be protected. Now, Gajendra thought he was protected by his own, he was a protector. There are many instances. One devotee recalled in one article in Back to Godhead magazine, this very nice devotee, very godbrother of mine. He was in India, in Hyderabad. He married a Marathi girl from Hyderabad. Went back to America. So he's a very sweet-natured devotee, Godrum Prabhu. So he wrote some article how when his father became very old and invalid, he couldn't relate to the situation because all his life he had been the head of the family who's looking after the family, and everyone respects him and they reciprocate with him in that role, and he's the one who chops up the wood and brings it in for the winter, and he brings the money home, and he's in charge, he tells everyone what to do, and they all love him and they all follow him, and all of a sudden he can't even feed himself and he has to be fed like a child, and he was unhappy in that situation. So anyway, that story is how Godrum and his wives, they looked after him, and they actually made him a devotee before he passed away. He became very appreciative of Krishna consciousness. So this feeling, kartaham, I am the doer. Even if you're good, even if you're a good person, a noble person, who's using strength for the benefit of others, but you can't actually do anything. We can't actually do anything good for anyone on the material platform. That creates an illusion. Now, they're not saying that fathers should be irresponsible. We're not saying that. But there is an illusion that can arise that everything is nice, we're protected, and sometimes we see that situation, it just changes overnight. You'll be in your home, and then all of a sudden some army from a neighboring state invades, and your whole world is turned upside down, and then you're a refugee, or more commonly nowadays, that you'll be a victim of terrorism. That recently those verdicts came after 20 years for the 1993 bomb blasts in Bombay. So one of my disciples, his elder brother, was killed in that bomb blast. So all of a sudden the family is just, you just don't expect it. But of course we should expect the unexpected. That's the nature of Maya. Maya presents herself to us as if she is Satchidananda. Everything here is eternal. We know what we're doing, and it's all bliss. But then all of a sudden there's a bomb blast, or less spectacular, you might just have a heart attack, and everything gets turned upside down. And you may not even die, you can just have a stroke or something like this. So we look up to people for protection, but they are Asat Sainya. In the very beginning of Shukadev's narration to Parikshit Maharaj, he refers to the Asat Sainya, the fallible, Srila Prabhupada translates this as fallible soldiers. Dehapatya kalatrarishu Asat Sainyesh Vasanapi. Our own very body, our wife, our children, they are incapable to protect us. Therefore, they're fallible soldiers. We take them that they are protecting us. This Gajendra, he thought he was protecting everyone, but then it became clear that he couldn't even protect himself, what to speak of others. And it's just it wasn't even that there was a whole army of crocodiles that attacked him. It was just one crocodile. It must have been quite embarrassing in front of all his wives, and all of a sudden he's just helpless. So the others who couldn't imagine living without him, being dependent on him, they all of a sudden found that, well, maybe everything's going to change. Of course, Gajendra was saved in more ways than one. But when we lose our protector, then we're put into confusion. We don't know what to do. In the spiritual realm also, we see after the departure of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur that the Gauriya Math was more or less a cohesive unit. But after he departed, then there was a fratricidal war. Practically it was a war. I mean, not with tanks and bombs and all this kind of thing, although there were some weapons used at some points. But so he was holding everything together. The whole Gauriya Math revolved around him. And even the branches of the Gauriya Math which have come up or come out of that war, and there's the original Math, Sri Chaitanya Math, and then there are all others that have come out from that organization. They still consider Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to be the center, but he didn't want that they all be fragmented like that. Similarly, after Srila Prabhupada passed away from our mortal vision, or however you want to put it in English, he disappeared is the simple way of putting it. Then, as he predicted in one of the cantos, one of the purports in the fourth canto, there was chaos. When the spiritual master departs, there's chaos. Because as long as the spiritual master is personally present, we see that to some extent or a large extent, he protects the disciples from their own anarthas. What was the difference before Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur passed and after? Well, in many ways there are many differences. One thing is that the disciples, they had to go on without him, and also he wasn't there to check the anarthas. Of course, we should be very careful when we're speaking about our revered Gurujan, or those who are on the platform of our Guru. But sometimes we speak like this, just like in the Bhagavatam for our elucidation. Vyasadeva has included the certain episodes about Brahma and Shiva, who are our worshipable gurus. So it's not that we think that they're mundane conditioned souls, but nevertheless there is some remarkable behavior which Vyasadeva has recorded for our elucidation, to help us to understand that we are in a very precarious position in this material world. So similarly, after Srila Prabhupada left, there was certain of his disciples arrogated to themselves the position of Acharya, and they formed an Acharya board which was above the GBC, which was, in retrospect, we can see, or maybe that it was, disavowal of Srila Prabhupada's rules. Prabhupada made the GBC the ultimate managing authority of ISKCON, but they made a body which de facto ruled above the GBC, and then chaos resulted. Of course, it's a complex history, and it's easy to blame others, but I'm just making the point here that without Srila Prabhupada there to directly relate to, and if we have doubts, we can go and ask him about specific situations. Shastra gives us general guidelines, but how to act in each specific situation, it's not possible that even if it was given in Shastra, every possible situation, how we should relate to it, we couldn't learn it all because there are innumerable possibilities. So, just like for instance, there's a crow up there. Should I send someone to chase it out with a stick or not? I didn't really think of that, but now I'm thinking of it because I'm looking for an example. Maybe it's not a bad idea, otherwise likely to pass stool underneath. But anyway, we'll leave it for now. So, at that point, we have to take shelter of his instructions as he's given them. We have to remember those instructions. Srila Prabhupada gave us extensive books so we can take advantage. But even knowing all of that, some devotees who some accuse of being of bad intent, but we can't say. They may have had the good. They may have thought this is the best way. We're doing the best thing to serve the mission, but in retrospect, it turned out to be a disaster. And it's pretty much universally acknowledged that the original, universally means of course within ISKCON, because who cares outside of ISKCON, is universally acknowledged that the first attempt of Srila Prabhupada's disciples to resolve the question of how to carry the movement in his absence became a big mess, the effects of which are still affecting our movement today and may very well do so even for many more years to come. But the point I'm making, I don't really want to get too much into all that, but the point is that without the direct protection and guidance of our guru, just like without the direct protection and guidance of Gajendra, his family members, they were bewildered. They wouldn't know how to react to the situation. So life has to go on. After the departure of Srila Prabhupada, life has to go on in Krishna consciousness. For weeks and months after Srila Prabhupada's departure, almost every Bhagavatam class was on this subject. How are we going to go on? And leaders reassuring the devotees. We just have to follow Prabhupada's instructions. Everything will be okay. Prabhupada's still with us. Like this. So it was for for several months, and then things gradually settled into place, because we couldn't imagine, even though it should have been obvious to us that Srila Prabhupada was going to pass away, but for most of us, we couldn't imagine what it meant, what would be the future. And although for most of us, we didn't have any direct personal contact with Srila Prabhupada anyway, but just the fact that he was, so in day-to-day life in many ways was going on the same. It's not that we would go up to Srila Prabhupada and ask him questions or discuss with him or any such thing. But day-to-day life went on the same. Either traveling Sankirtan or living in the temple, daily program, all these things. But the assurance that we had, the sense of safety that we had with, Srila Prabhupada's there, he'll protect us. So that we were tried to be reassured that, Srila Prabhupada's still with us. He lives forever by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him. And that he made this organization, he made the GBC, we should have faith in the GBC. And then the 11 acharyas, they were all said to be non-different from Srila Prabhupada, which is true in one sense, if they actually followed him in the proper way. But that was a grave mistake that was made to to arrogate to them the position of being the same as Srila Prabhupada in almost every respect. So, it's easy to judge in hindsight, but the point is there that after Srila Prabhupada left, we were all we felt uneasy and insecure in some way. In other ways, yes, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Srila Prabhupada is our eternal spiritual master. But there was a difference. It was a almost palpable difference between Srila Prabhupada being personally present and not being present. And we've seen that after Srila Prabhupada's departure also, that some of his disciples, they became very prominent and they gave shelter to many devotees, their own disciples plus other disciples of Srila Prabhupada, and then they left. Either they left the movement and went to Maya, or, that was much later. Some of them just started leaving their bodies. But when they left, not the ones who left their bodies, but if they left Krishna consciousness, it was in almost every case a complete disaster. And many of the devotees, their disciples, they just left Krishna consciousness altogether. Why should they do that? Because they'd put all their hopes in their guru. And even many of the disciples of Srila Prabhupada who were doing very well in their presence, they were protected and fostered, and they were doing well, many of them, which is why disciples of Srila Prabhupada wanted to go and serve with them, because they were, I'm thinking of a few of them now, they were dynamic leaders, and they were pushing on the movement and themselves sacrificing. But then some anartha in each case became prominent and they left. And we find that in many cases the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, who were so well sheltered by them, in lacking that shelter, then they themselves became somewhat lost and confused and not really knowing how to relate to the world of ISKCON and devotees. And then many of them, they adjusted and went on, but it was a great shock for them, because for them, the Krishna consciousness and their life service was within a certain setup, and everything seemed very secure, and everything seemed very clear. Then all of a sudden, it wasn't. And the whole edifice, which was based on the foundation of a certain powerful devotee, became non-existent. It just ceased to exist. When the foundation went, and then the whole building went. So, what do we learn from this? I give another example. One of the leaders of the movement during Srila Prabhupada's personal presence, from the very beginning, Garga Muni, the younger brother of Brahmananda. So, he was living in Bangkok in Thailand, Krungthep, which is the Thai name in short. So I met him. This was about 10 years after Srila Prabhupada's departure. I was serving there in Thailand for some time, and I met him, and he was very happy to see me. I was happy to see him, of course. I went to see him. He didn't come to see me. And he had somewhat long hair, which Srila Prabhupada had previously referred to as Garga Muni's Shakespearean locks. And he spoke on and on and on about his remembrances of Srila Prabhupada, and it was very nectarian to hear. And he was also very enlivened to speak it. And then at one point he said, but actually you're better devotee than me because you're still serving the mission, whereas I'm not. And then I asked him, well, why not? And he said, well, my whole Krishna consciousness is based on Prabhupada. And I know it's not the best level, but that's what it is. And shortly before Prabhupada left, I left because I saw Prabhupada was going to leave, and then I couldn't relate to anyone else, and whatever I did was for Prabhupada. And he also said that actually you're doing better because you're continuing to serve, but he put all his dedication was to the person Srila Prabhupada as he knew him, which is very nice on one hand, but on the other hand, as he himself recognized it, and I'm certainly not saying this to in any way denigrate Gargamuni Prabhu, who has remained, he's still a devotee, maybe not in the same prominent way that he was previously. But we have to be prepared and ready for anything. And even those who are our shelters, they're not going to be there all the time. In fact, a lot of the time they're not. I mean, it's Srila Prabhupada himself shocked his first followers in America by leaving them. After developing an ashram in New York City beginning from mid-1966, after almost a year of preaching there, and every day Srila Prabhupada would be there for them. And then at one point he said, now I'm going to San Francisco. How will we go on? They couldn't imagine. He told them, you keep my picture here and you read every day from the books and you just do the same things without me. But they couldn't imagine. And eventually they adjusted. And of course Srila Prabhupada would come from time to time. And eventually he sent them off. He sent Brahmananda off to Africa, which was a very tough field even now, what to speak of them. And it was tough for devotees in so many ways. I mean, a lot of people didn't like our movement. They didn't like devotees at all. I know myself, I joined relatively late, that we'd go on book distribution and chanting in the central London. It was just a regular thing to get arrested. There was nothing really to be afraid of. They're not going to torture you physically or anything, but it was just as a kind of harassment. They could keep you for up to 24 hours without any charge. And so they'd usually just take us, lock us up for 2-3 hours, and then give us book us on some minor offense. Obstruction was a common one. And then we'd go to the court the next day and we'd be wasting your whole morning, and then you'd have to pay a £5 fine, which is £5 then is something like, I don't know, £50 now. So anyway, it doesn't mean anything to you because you use rupees. So we were able to do so. Well, there may be several reasons, but we had great faith in we're doing this for Srila Prabhupada. So, but it should have been obvious to us, although it never really was, that Srila Prabhupada isn't always going to be there in the same way that he was in his personal presence. And most of his disciples were 40 or 50 years younger in terms of bodily age, so it should have been obvious that he wouldn't be there all the time for them in the personal way. So we have to be prepared. Srila Prabhupada said, ultimately we have to fly our own plane. That doesn't mean that the instructions, everything we've learned from the trainer, that goes with us, but ultimately we have to make our own effort in Krishna consciousness, and although Guru and Krishna are always there with us, but not always in the same way. That, the personal presence won't always be there. So we have to learn how to connect to Krishna, connect to the parampara by the fully spiritual method. Then that means that we may have some sentimental attachment to very good Tamil. You don't have the word sentimental? Well, in Sanskrit it's there. They're derived from the word bhava panna, or how would you say it? Sentimental. There could be bhava panna, or there's one. How do you make words? There's some. It's not used very often in Hindi or Bengali, but there is. To make the noun into an adjective. I can't remember it now, but there is anyway. You can say bhava mulak. It's maybe not exactly the same word. Even words, these abstract terms like sentimental, they're not very precise anyway. If you say cow, it's clearly understood what you mean, but abstract terms like sentimental, it's understood what it means, but it's abstract. So by definition, it's less easy to define. I'm still trying to remember that. Can't remember. If I remember, I'll let you know. So, and attachment in, that's asakti, anurag. Asakti is the general term. Do you have that in Tamil? You have some other term. You should learn these words because you have to preach. You have to give classes in Tamil, so you have to know. And the people, you say, well, the people won't understand it. They have to learn also. Right? We had to learn all these words in English. The three modes of material nature. You go to an Oxford professor of English and talk to him about the three modes of material nature. He won't have a clue what you're talking about. It's our own internal vocabulary that we need to use, just like mathematicians have their own internal vocabulary, and engineers have their own internal vocabulary, and ballet dancers have their own internal vocabulary. So we also have ours. So, by the attachment to Srila Prabhupada of many of his devotees, that may be, I'm not saying it's on the mundane platform, but it may be not on the fully mature spiritual platform, and that's seen by the weaknesses that they manifest after Srila Prabhupada's departure. So sometimes we hear devotees say, well, you don't know Srila Prabhupada. I lived with him for so many years. But then Srila Prabhupada dealt with different people in different ways. So you knew the Srila Prabhupada who behaved with you in one way, but then he behaved with others in other ways. And what is the essence of Srila Prabhupada or any guru is his teachings. So that's why Srila Prabhupada said, if you want to know me, read my books. How he dealt with you, you may interpret it one way or the other. So I say, well, see, Srila Prabhupada, he dealt with me like this, but that doesn't mean that you have to deal with everyone like that. He may have dealt with you like that because he didn't take very seriously some fault, because it may be for various reasons that he. Generally, we see that Srila Prabhupada was very strong and heavy with his the devotees who are more close to him, and he was rarely chastising of women disciples. So What do we understand from that? Well, one thing you could deduce from that is that those who got the more chastisement, they were more trusted or expected to. Is it that they were worse devotees and they got chastisement, or maybe it's they were better devotees? Because Srila Prabhupada trusted that they could take that without being sentimentally hurt. They could understand. Anyway, now you see we're getting into the realm of somewhat speculation there, but his teachings in his books, if we want to know him, that doesn't mean he's not a person who lived and moved among us, and that there's much to learn from how he lived, what he did, and how he interacted with people. But ultimately we have to take shelter of his instructions. Srila Prabhupada himself said that he didn't have much personal association with his guru, but he was obviously very close to him. He was empowered by him in a way that all his other god brothers were not. And Srila Prabhupada, when he was asked about going to America, how could you go to America alone? Prabhupada said, I was never alone. My spiritual master was always with me. So, the ultimate protector is Krishna. He's always there. Srila Prabhupada commented that about sannyasi. He should be able to go anywhere alone because he's paratma nishtha. He knows that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is everywhere with him, so he doesn't feel alone. Although generally it's recommended that sannyasis also have it, because that's a principle of Vaishnavism, that you should keep Vaishnava association. So, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is always there, and ultimately we depend on Him. We have to learn how to depend on Him. How do we depend on Him? We depend on Him through His representatives, the Guru and Vaishnavas, Hari Guru Vaishnava, and all three together. But we should know that in this material world, everything is changing. Adhibhuta ksharo bhava. Everything in this material world is, by very nature, always changing. We won't always get the association of those who we come to depend on that association or that direct personal guidance. But it won't always be there. At any moment it can be terminated. So we have to learn what are the instructions and what we're supposed to do, and know that as we grow older, especially as we grow older, then we have to ourselves be ready to give guidance to others. Guidance like this, among other things, to tell them that don't just depend on me, because I'm not here all the time, and I'm also not omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, as is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So ultimately we all have to take shelter of Him. Yeah, any question about this? How do we take shelter of Krishna? By Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, Padasevanam. Shravana Kirtana Karo Anukana. Always hearing and chanting about Krishna. That doesn't mean that we should minimize or think unimportant the association and guidance of Guru and Vaishnavas. It's also, all these things have to be understood in proper perspective. So, question, yeah.
Guru Maharaj, I noticed that even among Prabhupada disciples, even among second generation, somehow everyone thinks that I know, we know.
Everyone thinks I know. among all the followers of Prabhupada and the disciples of Srila Prabhupada's disciples? Well, we're supposed to know. One who's especially one who's Brahminically initiated is supposed to know what are the teachings. You're supposed to know.
There are also different different.
The different outlooks. Well, the traditional way to solve that was to have debate and see which is correct. In ISKCON at the present time, actually for many years there have been different outlooks, but debate has not been encouraged. The GBC has tried to pretend that it doesn't exist or that it's not very important or not very significant. But this year there's one issue has come up which is very insignificant, very significant, and they don't know really what to do with it. So they tabled it for 1 year, whether there should be female Diksha gurus or not. So in general, the open debate hasn't been encouraged, and it's difficult to do it also because people don't know how to debate. There are rules of debate, and there's a system that if you are defeated, then you become the disciple of the one who defeats you. But people don't know that they're defeated. You know, even if they're thoroughly defeated, they can't even understand it, and they don't know the rules. And I mean, on this feminism issue, there's a clear flaw in their basic epistemology. Flaw means error, which you'll find in the first edition of Back to Godhead after it was stopped for about 1.5 years. It was the women's issue. And Pranada Devi Dasi in one article wrote that we are going to base our understanding of women's roles in Krishna consciousness on the way that Srila Prabhupada dealt with his women disciples. And that was it. That's their total epistemology. Which ignores that Srila Prabhupada himself, well, first of all, it ignores all his instructions, just on the way that Prabhupada dealt with us. That's all. It ignores his instructions, and it ignores the fact that he said that his books, he should be understood through his books. So this is the whole crux of the feminism versus traditionalism, or feminism versus what's the word? Talibanism. Taliban, they use that word on Dandavats, which just goes to show where the leadership is at on these issues. So that's the crux of the issue, that one says, well, Prabhupada treated us like this, and that should be the way it should be forever. But Prabhupada said, I want that the female daughters of my disciples, they should be trained how to cook and how to be these two things, how to cook nicely and how to be very chaste. And they didn't, and he gave in. So, and the whole point of Varnashram that Srila Prabhupada wanted to institute. So the fact that Srila Prabhupada dealt with his Western disciples in certain ways, understanding that they're culturally barbarians, actually. So he gave them the essence of the practices, but culturally, as he told Shubhag Maharaj, that you should, philosophy you can learn from the Western devotees, but how to live and behave, you learn from what you learn from your parents. So this is the crux of the issue. Should our movement, because Srila Prabhupada made adjustments to Western culture, should that be the standard for all of ISKCON for the next 10,000 years? that now we have to teach the Indian women to dance at the front in kirtan, and which when I was present in India, when Srila Prabhupada was present, his Indian female disciples, they would stand. No one told them to. They'd stand right at the back, and they wouldn't move even their fingers. What to speak of dancing? And Prabhupada never told them that they had to. Now you jump up the front and start thrashing about in front of everyone. So that's the crux of that issue. There's a misunderstanding. The epistemology is wrong. But anyway, I'm making the point that I don't know, the GBC is somehow hoping that these things will just go away or something, and then we'll, just by saying unity in diversity, that everything's okay and everyone will be happy, but it doesn't work like that. There's another thing, there are so many things that Srila Prabhupada said we cannot allow polygamy within our society, but even after saying that, so that's like made this no polygamy. Prabhupada was against it, although he writes for it in his books. But even after that, Srila Prabhupada, on more than one occasion, he encouraged it. He said there are so many young women joining our movement, and he said, I have no objection if a man can maintain, he can have 36 wives. He said, I have no objection. So those instructions are there also, but not within our society. What I understand from this is not that he's going to be the temple president and supported by the temple funds, but if he's earning his own money, then he can have 36 wives. So that's another example of, that's not really an issue, because everyone's been convinced. Everyone more or less in our movement's convinced that Prabhupada was against polygamy, but I'm not, because I read. I don't just take it what everyone says. I read what Prabhupada says. And he did. That wasn't the only thing Prabhupada said. It's interpreted like that then Prabhupada was ultimately against it. Yeah, but the debate we also don't know, because everyone just gets all agitated, starts calling names like Taliban. And, you may say feminist is also name calling, but no, it means the idea that feminist means the things that women should have equal rights so that word is exactly correct. Whereas Taliban is not at all correct. It's just a politically motivated term. Those who oppose feminism within ISKCON, it's not that they're going to go and start blowing people up like the Taliban do. So it's just politics to use terms like that. Without proper Brahminical understanding, what happens is it just breeds politics. So, for instance, this group who are 4 female Diksha Gurus, they brought out a book completely slanted. For instance, some interviews were made some years ago with various scholars and acharyas in South Indian sampradayas. Out of 9, I believe it was, 7 of them were completely against female Dikshuras. Pejava Swami, the Vishveshwara Tirtha, the interviewers there with him, in which he was asked, he says, yes, women, they can also have a guru, and he had to ask him 4 or 5 times. He just couldn't even imagine that the question was that can a woman herself be a guru. When he heard it, he just walked out of the room. He just thought it was so ridiculous. But there were 2 of them. One of them said unequivocally yes, and that person, he was not a pundit, he was a priest. And the other one said yes, possibly under some sort, and that was printed in their book. And all the others against it, they didn't print it at all. So what's that? That's just politics, that's all. just politics, just to give an example. So without healthy discussion of philosophical issues, then the philosophy becomes used as in a political way to try and control people. And then you go down the same path as the Catholic Church or any church. For instance, the idea that in Christianity, the whole idea is that Christianity means you have to believe that Jesus died on the cross for your sins and to absolve you of your sins, and you just have to believe that and you're saved. And that's the whole essence of Christianity. But Christ never taught that. Or the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, this Holy Trinity. Christ never taught that. But people who didn't believe it, I mean, it was very dangerous at one point to have any different opinion, because His Holiness the Pope would send his armies to slaughter people who had different opinions. That's historical fact, and not just once. The Inquisition was a children's tea party compared to some of the other things that their holinesses were doing. So without clear understanding, then we're going to have misunderstanding. And how will that understanding come? Not just by reading. You have to follow also. You all have to follow. We should see the GBCs, they're making the decisions. Are they all there in the morning program? Do we see them? We should look and see. For they may say they're old and they're sick. I say if they're not physically capable enough of, or for whatever reason they can't attend the temple programs, which is the most basic thing for someone who's supposed to be a spiritual leader, then they shouldn't be a GBC either. Then they're not fit enough physically or spiritually to be a leader of the movement. So that's the first thing we should see. But that's been overlooked for years. So these are the kind of things. Before Prabhupada would discuss any philosophy of this, he would like to see this. Are the leaders, are they rising early? Are they attending the programs? Are they visibly chanting their rounds? Are they taking Krishna Prasadam? That we have to see. Otherwise we're going to be materially influenced. We already are if we don't follow these basic things.